This man once saved Rome from fire and mass slaughter. Years later, that same Rome turned on him and chased him out of the very city he had rescued. His name was Cicero. As consul, he crushed a plot to burn Rome to the ground and slaughter the Senate. This is the story of the Roman Republic and how saving it nearly cost him everything. By the end, you'll see how the same act that made him a hero got him branded a murderer, punished under a law written just for him. How does a man who was carried through the streets as father of the country end up alone, stripped of his home, exiled by his own city? In Rome, the crowd once called him Pater Patri, father of the country. Now his house on the Palatine Hill was about to be torn down stone by stone. This was the Roman Republic at its most fragile, a republic that turned around and destroyed the very man who had just saved it from ruin. Why did Rome do this to its own hero? To understand the punishment, we have to go back 5 years, to the night 5 men died in a pit beneath the city. In 58 BC, a new tribune named Clodius rose in Rome with a personal grudge against Cicero, and the power to turn that grudge into law. Clodius passed a law: any Roman official who executed a citizen without trial must be exiled from Italy. It named no one directly, but everyone in Rome knew exactly who it meant. Cicero did not wait to be dragged away. He put on mourning clothes, grew out his beard, and fled the city he had once ruled as consul. Behind him, Clodius's men tore down his house on the Palatine Hill. In its place, they built a shrine to the goddess of liberty, a final insult. For over a year, Cicero wandered in exile across Greece and the Balkans, banned from Italy, separated from his wife and children, writing letters that begged old allies to bring him home. The charge against him was simple on paper: executing Roman citizens without a trial. But those executions had once made him the most celebrated man in Rome. So what were these executions? To understand them, we have to go back 5 years earlier, to a single night that decided the fate of the Republic. December 5, 63 BC. Inside a cramped stone pit called the Tullianum, 5 men waited in the dark, condemned without ever facing a jury. The walls were damp, cut deep into solid rock, with only a narrow opening far above letting in a sliver of light. There was no courtroom to appeal to, only silence, damp air, and the wait for a decision the Senate had already made. One of them, a former consul, was now serving as praetor, one of Rome's highest officials. Now he sat chained beside common conspirators, all accused of plotting to burn Rome down. That same day, in the Senate, a senator named Julius Caesar rose to speak. He warned that killing citizens without trial, even guilty ones, could destroy the Republic's own laws forever. Then Cato the Younger stood and argued the opposite: Rome itself was under attack, and mercy now would only invite the next conspiracy. His argument carried the Senate. The vote was for death. As consul, Cicero gave the order himself. No trial. No appeal. Just a rope in the hands of the executioner, tightened in the dark, one condemned man after another. When it was done, Cicero walked out and said one word to the waiting crowd: Vixerunt, they have lived. Rome understood immediately. The men were dead. The city erupted. People lit torches and lined the streets to escort Cicero home, calling him the savior of Rome, the father of the country. For one night, Cicero was untouchable. He had stopped a plot to massacre the Senate and set Rome on fire. Nobody dared question how he'd done it. But 5 years later, that same night would become the crime that exiled him. So what exactly had Cicero stopped, and why was it so dangerous it justified skipping a trial? To answer that, we have to go back further still, to the autumn weeks before, when Cicero first realized someone inside Rome was quietly plotting to kill him and burn the city. In the autumn of 63 BC, Cicero began receiving warnings. A senator named Catiline was recruiting men across Italy, gathering weapons, and plotting something violent. Catiline had run for consul twice and lost twice. This time, instead of asking for votes, he was preparing an army and marking senators for death. The plan, Cicero learned, was brutal: assassinate the Senate in one night, then set fires across Rome to cover the chaos while the killers escaped. On the night the plot was supposed to begin, Cicero had armed guards posted around his own house. Catiline's men found the doors locked and the plan already known. The next day, Cicero stood in the Senate and spoke directly to Catiline, who was sitting in the room. "How long, Catiline, will you abuse our patience?" Every senator near Catiline got up and moved away, leaving him alone on the bench. He left Rome that same night, and rode to join his army in the countryside. But Catiline had left men behind in Rome to finish the job. They made the mistake of trying to recruit foreign envoys from Gaul, who secretly turned the conspirators' signed letters over to Cicero as proof. Cicero had the proof he needed. But a plot this violent didn't come from nowhere. To understand Catiline, we have to go back further to the man he used to be. Catiline was born into an old, once proud Roman family that had lost its fortune. By his 40s, he was drowning in debt he had no way to repay. He wasn't alone. Across Italy, thousands of veterans and bankrupt nobles were in the same position: land gone, debts crushing them, and no path back to power through the normal system. Catiline promised them the only fix he had left: wipe out the debts, by force if necessary. It was a simple message that turned desperate, ruined men into willing soldiers. He ran for consul on that promise and lost twice. Each defeat pushed him further from the law and closer to the idea of simply taking power by force. By 63 BC, Catiline had built a small army in Etruria and a network of allies inside Rome ready to kill senators the night the signal came. It should have worked. Rome's elite barely noticed the warning signs of a debt crisis turning into an armed uprising. One man did notice: the consul standing in their way. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss what's next. That consul was Cicero, and his path to that office is its own unlikely story. To understand why he fought so hard to save Rome, go back further, to where he started. Cicero was not born into Rome's ruling class. He came from Arpinum, a small hill town outside the city, with no famous ancestors and no family name already sitting in the Senate. Romans called men like him novus homo, a new man. Outsiders like Cicero were mocked in the Senate, blocked from office, and expected to fail long before they ever gave a speech. Being an outsider meant Cicero had no family connections to fall back on and no inherited network of allies waiting inside the Senate. Every case he won, every ally he made, he had to earn entirely on his own, and that gave him a sharper sense than most hereditary senators of how fragile a position in Rome could be. Cicero fought his way up through the law courts instead, becoming Rome's sharpest prosecutor, winning cases against corrupt governors that even powerful senators were too afraid to touch. By 63 BC, against every expectation, he was elected consul, the highest office in Rome, the first outsider to hold it in over 30 years. He had spent his whole life proving he belonged in Rome's inner circle. Then, months into his term, a conspiracy threatened to burn the whole system down. Cicero didn't just stop the plot, he used it to prove, once and for all, that an outsider could save Rome better than any noble ever had. None of this happens without the deeper problem eating away at Rome for decades: a republic increasingly run by a shrinking circle of noble families while ordinary citizens fell into ruin. Decades of wars had made a small elite in Rome unimaginably rich, while ordinary soldiers came home from years of fighting to find their farms gone and no work waiting for them. Without land or steady work, Many of these veterans drifted into the cities, or back to the countryside estates where they had once been small farmers now reduced to laborers or tenants on land owned by the same elite families who had grown rich from the wars they'd fought. Debt was crushing so many ordinary citizens that even old, respected families like Catalans could lose everything almost overnight, with no legal way out and no mercy from the courts. That desperation is exactly what Catalan weaponized, and it was something Cicero, an outsider who'd clawed his way up without inherited wealth, understood more directly than most senators around him. So the same broken system that made Catalan dangerous is what made Cicero necessary, and it's the same system that turned on Cicero the moment he was no longer useful. That is the loop this whole story closes, a republic so fragile it needed one ruthless act to survive a single year and then punished the very same man for that act 5 years later. Cicero was eventually recalled from exile in 57 BC, welcomed back into Rome by cheering crowds lining the road, the same city that had chased him out barely a year earlier. But he was never given real power again. The Senate he'd saved kept him around as a symbol, not a leader respected, but sidelined for the rest of his life. The law that exiled him was never really about justice. It was about a personal enemy finding one legal loophole to destroy a man too popular to attack directly. Cicero himself seemed to sense the irony that surviving to save the Republic could feel lonelier than dying for it would have been. 15 years later, Rome would kill him anyway, not by exile this time, but by the sword, on the orders of a new set of men in power. Cicero's severed head and hands were nailed to the very platform in the Forum where he'd once given his greatest speeches of final, brutal irony for the man who saved Rome with words. He stopped a massacre, exposed a conspiracy, and helped keep the Roman Republic alive for a few more decades before it finally collapsed into empire. And Rome repaid him first with exile, then with his life. So here's the question: if saving a republic could get you exiled and later killed for it, would you still do it? Tell us what you'd have done, down in the comments.